in progress.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 63rd annual meeting of the Institute of Nuclear Materials Management. I'm Susan Pepper, president of the Institute, and together with Mark Schanfein, our vice president, I'm proud to open this meeting. Thank you all for joining us today. This is the third virtual annual meeting of the INMM, and we have a great program in store for you this year. And it actually started yesterday with the awards presentation and the president's reception. If you are not able to attend the awards presentation, a recording is available for you to view during and following the meeting. Recognizing our members by presenting awards and promotions to the grade of fellow is one of the honors that I have as president. I want to take a moment to thank the awards committee and the fellows committee for their work in reviewing this year's nominations and creating the presentations that we saw yesterday. For the awards committee, I'd like to recognize and thank Arden Dugan, Joshua Rakowski, and Joseph Nduzzi. And for the fellows committee, many thanks to Nancy Jo Nicholas. There's quite a lot of work that's involved in reviewing the nominations, and I appreciate their diligence and dedication to doing that. And thank you for those who took the time to nominate their colleagues for this recognition. This is a time-consuming process and it's essential, and we appreciate those who took the time to do that. And once again, congratulations to all the recipients of the 2022 INMM Awards and to our new fellows. Let me take a moment to thank all our speakers for choosing the INMM to present your work, and to our session chairs who have accepted the responsibility of moderating the many sessions in our meeting. I have to apologize for the late notification you received this year and for some of the last minute changes we had to implement to complete this year's program. We sincerely appreciate your flexibility and your efforts to help us adjust. Today's program is going to begin with the opening plenary, which will begin right after our opening remarks. Today's opening will feature Marcia, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, Lars van Dassen, who is the executive director of the World Institute for Nuclear Security, and Jeff Navin, who is the director of external affairs at Terrapower. Please consult your program for a list of all the sessions that are going to be held this year. We have a full program again, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of interesting papers, posters, and panels, and opportunities for you to engage with all of the presenters. I'm not going to review the program in detail, but I'll draw your attention to a few highlights. We have a special session that has been arranged in coordination with representatives from the Asia Pacific Safeguards Network. The session is scheduled for Monday starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Tuesday morning in the Asia Pacific area. The session will include a panel discussion on the history and evolution of the APSN, featuring representatives of the founding countries. The panel will be complemented by oral presentations that are of general interest. Note that this was originally scheduled to be two sessions, one on Monday and one on Wednesday, but we've combined them into one session that'll be held tonight, US time, and tomorrow morning in the Asia Pacific area. I encourage you to attend this evening's session. I think it's going to be interesting for all of us, as we haven't had much interaction with the APSN previously with the INMM and the APSN. Our meeting will wrap up on Thursday with the closing plenary and student awards. The closing plenary is going to start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and our featured speakers are Dominique Moileau, who is president of Women in Nuclear Global, His Excellency Gustavo Lauvinen, president designate of the 10th Review Conference for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Alexander Kement, who is director of the Disarmament, Arms Control, and Non-Proliferation Department of the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and president of the June 2022 first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The student awards and closing remarks will begin immediately following the closing plenary. Please join us and show your support to the students whose work we will hear from this week. We'll also announce the winners of the scavenger hunt at that time. Now I'd like to recognize our platinum exhibitor, Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I thank them for their strong and longtime support of the INMM annual meeting and encourage you to visit them and our other exhibitors in our annual meeting exhibits. I'd also like to recognize our sustaining members, all of whom are shown on this slide. Our sustaining members support us financially, enabling us to carry out the activities that are so important to our members and our community. And finally, I want to congratulate the Nuclear Threat Initiative on its 20th anniversary. NTI has been a great partner and supporter of the INMM. They're a sustaining member as well, and for the third year now, they are providing funding for us to offer registration grants to increase the accessibility of our annual meeting for people who would not otherwise be able to attend due to financial constraints. So thank you very much to NTI. Now I want to turn the microphone over to Mark Schanfein, who will provide additional information about this week's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome, everyone. This year, we're using the same platform from last year, vFairs. Even if you were able to participate in the meeting last year, I encourage you to watch the brief tutorial, which is the first link on the navigation bar that runs across the top of the platform. You can follow the navigation bar or lobby signs to access the plenary sessions, technical and poster sessions, as well as exhibits, the job fair, and special events. The plenary, technical, and panel sessions will be held via Zoom. Just follow the signs and listings for events of interest, and when the sessions open, you will be in the audience. Note that you will not be able to log into the sessions until about 5 minutes before they begin. The schedule has been arranged with longer breaks that will give you plenty of time to check mail and take screen breaks. We have also incorporated long, unopposed sessions for you to visit the exhibitors who have created interactive programs to engage you. We have 5 companies and national laboratories that are eager to visit with you, so be sure to enter each exhibit booth to check it out. The exhibitor hours are Monday from 1 to 2:30 and Wednesday from 12:30 to 2 Eastern Time. In addition, the exhibitors will be available on Tuesday from 12:30 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Note that in addition to visiting the booths during the exhibitor hall hours, you can click on each booth at any time to pre-schedule times to chat with the booth staff. In addition to the exhibits, we have a career fair with 10 companies ready to meet with students and professionals to discuss job opportunities in their organizations. In the career fair room, you can follow the links to learn more about the company and view their current opportunities. During the career fair hours on Tuesday from 2 to 3:30 p.m. and on Thursday from 9 to 10:30 a.m., you can talk live via video or chat with any of the representatives. The breaks can also be used to visit the poster hall on vFairs, where all posters are available to view on demand, together with pre-recorded short presentations by authors to introduce their topics. You'll see a Rate This Poster button on each poster. Please give up to 5 stars for the posters you like best. We will award a gift to the top poster. The poster authors have pre-recorded short presentations to introduce their topics and will be on hand Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time to discuss them and answer questions. This year, the poster sessions are easily accessible on the platform. Again, just follow the link from the navigation bar or lobby signs. Similar to last year, we have a scavenger hunt. Exhibitor logos and colorful icons reflecting our meeting theme are hidden throughout the meeting platform. Explore the platform, visit the exhibitors, and attend sessions to find these items. Attendees who find them all will be entering into a random drawing for prizes. Throughout the meeting platform, you will find links to all the resources and activities, including the exhibit hall, networking lounge, career fair, and an information desk, where you can get assistance from platform staff or INMM staff. You can also make contacts and see who is participating through the Search Attendees link, which will provide a searchable list. Make use of the platform chat function by clicking the chat icon to directly message other attendees, and even invite them to a private video chat without ever leaving the meeting. Again, to ensure you make the most out of your virtual meeting experience, be sure to watch the brief instructional tutorial linked on the main navigation bar. This year's Women of Mass Distinction event will feature guest speaker Maria Nadenova, Program Manager of the IEA Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellowship Program. In addition, 4 fellows will discuss their experience as Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellows. Also, the INMM Diversity Committee has organized a special session on the topic of global successes and challenges in ensuring diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in nuclear. That will be held on Monday from 2:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Leading up to our meeting, the Data Science Working Group of the Cyber and Emerging Technologies Committee sponsored a UF6 Container Identification Hackathon. This hackathon is intended to introduce participants to a machine learning problem, which is meant to be solvable by beginners and offers the opportunity to learn one of the neural network frameworks available in Python. Prizes will be awarded for the best 3 INMM student member submissions. The hackathon is the subject of a session on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern. The annual meeting sessions will be recorded and will be available for viewing 1 month following the annual meeting. The INMM has a respectful behavior policy, which still applies in the virtual meeting format. The INMM welcomes all opinions that are offered politely and respectfully, but we cannot tolerate abusive language, bullying, or harassment. Keep in mind that sometimes written statements can be interpreted more harshly than intended. Make a point to be kind and respectful, even if you would disagree with someone. We ask that our session chairs and speakers log into their sessions using the Zoom link you were provided at least 15 minutes before the start, so that the tech team can make sure your audio and video is working correctly. You will note that breaks between sessions are 30 minutes. This will decrease the likelihood that the close of one session will affect the start of the next session. However, session chairs are reminded to keep speakers on schedule and end sessions promptly at the appointed time to avoid conflicts between sessions. All sessions are live Zoom meetings. As attendees, please mute yourself and use the raise hand or chat function to ask questions. The co-chairs will help to moderate the Q&A period. You can also use the chat function to make comments and to show your appreciation for others' contributions. The INMM annual business meeting will be held this year on Tuesday, July 26 at 3:45 p.m. Eastern Time. This is the opportunity for the executive committee to review the year's activities with the membership, recognize executive committee service, announce new senior members, and recognize sustaining members. A drawing for 2 free INMM memberships will be held, and you must sign into the meeting to win. Use your social media to share your experiences at this meeting and to promote the INMM. Our social media codes are being projected for your information. Looking ahead, mark your calendar, May 22nd to the 26th, for the second INMM ISARDA annual meeting. This meeting will be held in Vienna, Austria at the Austria Center, and the INMM and ISARDA have already started planning. The theme for the 2023 meeting is Atoms for Peace, Evolution of Technologies for the Future. This concludes the opening of the 63rd INMM annual meeting. The opening plenary with Marcia Orr, Lars van Dassen, and Jeff Navin will begin shortly in the continuation of this meeting. Thank you.
We have about 1 minute until the start of the opening plenary, so we will begin at that time, 15 minutes after the hour.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Laura Rockwood, currently the Director of Open Nuclear Network, and I'd like to welcome our guests and all of you participants to the first plenary session of our 63rd annual conference. During this session, we're going to have with us 3 guest speakers speaking on widely diverse subjects, all of which are relevant to the INMM community. By way of logistics, we're going to take a few questions following each of our speakers and try to leave some time before closing for any additional questions. It would be greatly appreciated if you could use the Q&A function in Zoom to post your questions so we can make sure to try to address as many of those questions as we can. I now have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Marcia Orr. Ms. Orr is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, a coach, and a mentor. In her previous position as head of equality, diversity, and inclusion at the facilities management company MCOR UK, she wrote and published the company's first inclusion, equity, and diversity strategy. Prior to joining MCOR UK, Marcia served 30 years in the West Midlands Police and West Mercia Police. Since then, she has worked with the Royal Navy as a learning and development advisor, and at the UK Atomic Energy Authority as an equality, diversity, and inclusion partner. Marcia, I'm pleased to be able to give you the floor.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for inviting me to speak and share my perspective on the topic of fostering diversity and inclusion in the nuclear industry. For me, it's more than a topic. I've developed an interest, passion, and knowledge over a number of decades. It began with my experience as a Black woman in UK police service and experiences which have continued to influence and impacted my personal and professional life and touches every part of my lived experience as a person, a mother, wife, grandmother, carer, family member, colleague, friend, ally, advocate, and anti-racism and anti-discrimination activist. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with this quote from the book, Managing the Change Process Complex. The higher you go in the company, the more that you find people who may become successful by doing what they've always done. They have difficulty realizing the need to change their own habits. Another problem is a lack of a shared vision. If everyone is thinking about change in a slightly different way, it's very difficult to move the organization forward. You have to get the mental arrows lined up. Finally, there's lethargy. If you wait too long to do something, you may never do anything. But when people see change begin to happen, if some little thing is run up the flagpole and well received, their minds begin to change. And the reason this quote is appropriate to diversity and inclusion is because of the following. Diversity is about difference, different people, different experiences, different cultures, different perspectives. Inclusion should take into account diversity. Again, different people, different experiences, different cultures. Diversity and inclusion efforts have primarily focused on diversity and not in providing an environment that supports those different people, different perspectives, different cultures, before inviting people into organizations. Organizations have for far too long focused on quick wins and not thought strategically about what they're doing. What I find ironic when asked to justify diversity and inclusion by presenting a business case is that it's deemed acceptable or palatable to senior leadership teams. Next slide, please. In providing a solution to fostering diversity and inclusion in the nuclear industry, I'm going to break this statement down into 3 parts. Let's start with experience. The higher you go in the company, the more people you find who have become successful by doing what they've always done. They have difficulty realizing the need to change their own habits. This just suggests that those in leadership position, and this applies to the nuclear industry, operate and make decisions based on their own experiences. Just consider leadership teams you've worked with, been part of, or observed. Consider the composition of the teams. How diverse are they? Consider how group thinking manifests itself when everyone at that leadership table has similar backgrounds, education, similar socioeconomic backgrounds even. How does this impact on individual, team and organisational behaviour? If we look at behaviourism, which is a theory of learning based on the idea that all behaviours are acquired through conditioning, and conditioning occurs through interaction with the environment. Behaviourists believe that our actions are shaped by environmental stimuli. Just consider how these play out when writing job descriptions and person specifications, in where you choose to place your advert, who the recruiter is, who is on your interview and selection panel, and who is recommended or supported for promotion. Let's pause to consider some types of biases. Affinity bias, also known as similarity bias, is the tendency people have to connect with others who share similar interests, experiences, and backgrounds. For example, when companies hire for culture fit. Conformity bias is the tendency people have to act similar to the people around them, regardless of their own personal beliefs or idiosyncrasies, also known as peer pressure. Ageism in the workplace is the tendency to have negative feelings about another person based on their age. Authority bias refers to when an idea and opinion is given more attention or thought to be more accurate because it was provided by an authority figure. Name bias is the tendency people have to judge and prefer people with certain kinds of names, typically names that are of Anglo origin. One study found that white names receive significantly more callbacks for interviews than African American names. Another study found that Asian last names are 28% less likely to receive a callback for an interview compared to Anglo last names. Next slide, please. So it's time to be honest with yourselves. How committed is the nuclear industry to taking action in fostering a diverse and inclusive environment? Action which will have an impact, not lots of activity that looks good, feels good, but doesn't make a difference to the lived experience of individuals from underrepresented or marginalised groups. The next slide, please. The discourse and the language around diversity and inclusion has changed over time and continues to change. I have noticed that organisations within the same industry are using different terminology, from EDI, DNI, DEI, DEIB, and DEIA. B being belonging, A being accessibility. You need to be on the same page with this. It appears to me that some organisations, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, focus on the mission and the mission statement, but do not determine what the vision is or what their D&I ultimate destination is. Remember what Mike said, the higher you go in the company, the more people you find who have become successful by doing what they have always done. They have difficulty realising the need to change their own habits. So who's deciding on the organisation or industry's D&I vision? Next slide, please. So we need to clarify what success is. This is particularly relevant to recruitment and attracting a diverse talent pipeline. I often hear we can't find diverse candidates. Where are you looking? Or have you just started off with the mindset that diverse talent doesn't exist without lowering standards? Here we go again, back to biases again. Can I have the next slide, please? And the next one. Thank you. Motivation, let's look at motivation. Disrupting the status quo is required for things to change. Challenging traditional ways of doing things will inevitably be opposed and resisted by some. That doesn't mean that the change isn't necessary and should be delayed or implemented in a way that satisfies the dissenters. If you wait for that, if you wait for a consensus, nothing will ever change. John Adams, the second president of the United States, is quoted as saying, "All great changes are irksome to the human mind, especially those which are attended with dangers and uncertain effects. Diversity and inclusion will be irritating and annoying to some. It will be viewed as dangerous by some, including those who could benefit from the changes, as backlash may be experienced. and uncertain for those who may have genuine fears that diversity and inclusion will have a detrimental impact on their opportunities. In fostering diversity and inclusion in nuclear, avoid purely reacting to events which will undoubtedly translate to being performative as opposed to being intentional. Next slide, please. All of these can be challenging to levels of motivation, but should not be used as an excuse not to do anything or what's acceptable to those who argue loudly. They are using their privilege to impede progress. Has the nuclear industry behaved in a way that could be viewed as tokenistic towards underrepresented and marginalised groups? How do you think that is perceived by others, internal and external stakeholders? Those quick wins have consequences. Next slide, please. So move out your comfort zone. To make changes, you will need to move out your comfort zone. This is a phrase coined by Judith M. Bardwick in her 1991 publication, The Danger in the Comfort Zone, which examines the phenomenon of entitlement. The comfort zone is a behavioural state within which a person operates in an anxiety-neutral condition, using a limited set of behaviours to deliver a steady level of performance, usually without any sense of risk. Can individuals and organisations in the nuclear industry move out of their way and the way of others by moving out of their comfort zone? And the next slide, please. So the challenge. To foster diversity and inclusion in nuclear industry, we all need to challenge ourselves, particularly those in leadership positions where a lot of power and influence lies. On a personal level, we need to critically reflect on our behaviours, the biases we hold, be they conscious or unconscious, and recognise what we need to change to promote and support diversity and inclusion, or rather inclusion and diversity. Starting by examining our personal and professional networks. By limiting and restricting diversity in our relationships, we miss out on the richness and learning that different perspectives can provide personally and professionally. Ask yourself, am I an ally, advocate, or gatekeeper? Be honest. At the team level, we need to develop effective collaborative relationships with different teams, internally and externally, not only when you want or need their input. Organisations within the nuclear industry need to ask themselves some uncomfortable questions. Why are we doing what we're doing when it comes to fostering diversity and inclusion? Or why are we not doing anything when it comes to fostering diversity and inclusion? Or how far are we prepared to go in fostering diversity and inclusion? Fostering diversity and inclusion should not just be limited to within your organisation, but also extend to the communities you operate in. If you're not doing so, why not? And finally, the next slide, please. However, the starting point in fostering diversity and inclusion in the nuclear industry is when talking to others, to be courageous in having those uncomfortable conversations, to listen to understand and not respond. So I'd like to thank you for listening to me. I hope you've listened to understand and not to respond, and I look forward to hearing your views and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcia. That very informative, very provocative. And given the background that you have, and the fields in which you've worked previously, facilities management, police services, the nuclear industry, as you pointed out, is often quite conservative and heavily male dominated. What have you found in your experience to be the most effective way to convince management of the importance of diversity to their organization?
There's two things. I'd love to be able to say, when I started on my journey, I wanted people to do the right thing, but everybody has their own hot buttons when it comes to this. For some people, they recognize the humanity of their fellow human beings, and for them, that is enough. For others, it's about the bottom line. It's about the business imperative. And I find that a little sad, but I do understand that. And so if you're looking at having a sustainable business, whatever it is, you can't keep fishing in the same pool for your talent. it will eventually dry out unless you're nurturing that talent. And also the world has changed. There are more women who are working and working longer and having long careers. Black and brown people are going into sectors that historically they wouldn't have gone in before. So if as an organisation, as leaders, you don't start to take that into account, you will find that your talent pipeline will very much diminish as time progresses. And there's also the fact that what the community and external stakeholders are looking in going, well, what sort of organisation are you? What are your values? Do your values actually align with what you've got on your website? And then it becomes, I call it an optical illusion.
Do you usually try to engage the management first? Do you start from the top down, bottom up? What, or combination of the two? What's the most effective strategy for getting an organization to choose to be on board?
I think over many years, trial and error and seeing what doesn't work. What's happened historically, you have employee resource groups. You have, I call them the foot soldiers, employees who are doing all the work, and managers and leaders going, yeah, that's okay. But actually, you need to engage the leadership. And part of that is them being vulnerable. Executive leadership, CEOs don't like to admit they don't know something, but they don't know a lot about DEI. And so you do need to engage them. You need to have those courageous conversations among leadership teams and go, actually, you need to educate yourself. And I'm quite hard, I will say. DEI is part of your business as any other part of your business. So as a leader, you need to understand it and educate yourself on that part of your business.
Well, I'm really curious. We're in this scientific business in which we work. You always hear, well, there aren't enough female candidates. And you frequently, even in an institutional organization like the IAEA, you will see people saying, well, we want to promote women. And then you have, on the other hand, we want to promote people from developing countries. And there seems to be this false dichotomy there. What do you see as the primary obstacles for organizations in having more diversity in their hiring and promotion policies?
You can have as many policies as you like, just like legislation, but if people aren't acting on those policies and legislation, then it means nothing. It's also about actually stepping back and going, what have we got to offer diverse candidates? Many organisations look at it as a one-way street instead of saying, what have we got to offer them? Maybe we're not marketing ourselves in a way that they think that's an attractive place to work. That's an attractive industry to work. Where are the role models? And if we constantly go on the almost deficit model of if we have more diversity, then the current group will have to give some up, that doesn't help things either. There's space for everyone. There's space for everyone. So it's about actually some mindset changing and some real digging deep. Do you really want to change things? Do you want it to look like change is happening? Because people see through it. If you've got your dissenters will see through it because they'll say the organisation's just being politically correct. And the people that the marginalised, underrepresented people will see it as being tokenistic. And that doesn't help anyone.
Mm-hmm. I noticed we have some questions from our audience, and I'd like to ask Mark if he could moderate some of those questions for us.
Yes. So one of the questions we have is, what is the most difficult part of implementing a DEIB program that you have experienced?
The most difficult part is leadership, organisations not knowing what they want or even an idea of what they want. So what's the priority for this business? Every organisation is different. What is the priority? Is it you've got quite a few women in the organisation, but they're not in leadership positions, need to work on that. Is that you've got a lack of diverse candidates? Is it that? What exactly is it? And what does success and good look like for your organisation? Because it will be different to someone else's. And so that's some of the work that has to be done. Okay, then. So you want diversity inclusion. What does it look like? What does it look like here? And also, what don't you want? And how far are you prepared to go? Because there'll always be those unspokens that might just be a little too far. We're not ready for that yet. Every organization's on its own journey and it's at different stages.
And in saying that, you hear a lot about metrics. And I'm wondering, what's your opinion of that? How well it works or doesn't work, or how you view it?
Unfortunately, what measured gets done. So you've also got to choose the right metrics, and that you don't get a focus on ticking boxes as opposed to having a real impact. And there's a balance there. What are the right metrics for the organization? And it might be, oh, we're not even collecting the right data. There's a lot of that going on. Organizations don't actually know what their demographic actually looks like, sometimes beyond male, female, and maybe some other protected characteristics. Do you know if you've got people neurodiverse? Do you know if you've got people of different disabilities? So without knowing what your demographic is, then what do you need to work on? And there's some fundamentals there.
So we have actually questions are coming in here. So we have another one. I like the puzzle analogy on your opening slide. Do you have tips to avoid tokenism? We've tried hiring cohorts of diverse people to build communities.
Have you actually spoken to the communities as opposed to going to them trying to recruit them? Having that conversation is a starting point. And remember, there will be some cynicism about why you're doing this. If you're from an underrepresented, marginalized group and nobody's been interested, and all of a sudden the brakes are off and they want to engage with you, there's going to be some, okay then, what do they want and what's in it for us? Bear in mind, some of us have seen this a number of times during our lifetime. And then these efforts don't stick. It doesn't have the impact and things go backwards. So it's about starting having a relationship, those conversations with people in those communities. And that's a long job. There are no quick fixes. And when there are quick fixes, they don't last.
Yeah, actually, the next question really kind of fits right into that, about a connection between investing in capacity building and hiring the right and prepared professionals. And the person particularly says, I wouldn't like to be hired because I'm a number.
Yeah, but we all get hired because we're a number. But some of us get hired because we're a number because of who we are at a particular point in time. So let's be real about this. We all get hired because we're a number. It just depends on the context. And it's not nice when you think it brings in a lot of doubt. How am I being recruited or offered this position, or even being called for an interview because of my competency or because of who I am? And so that, I've experienced that personally. Why do they, and looking at the website to see, have they got any metrics to say they are actively trying to recruit people that look like me? And that's the reason why I've got this far.
I'm going to jump in right here, Marcia, because I have some alternative thoughts about this. Do you have any thoughts about quotas and whether they are effective? My own personal view is I don't care why somebody hires me, just as long as they hire me. But there are differences of views about quotas. Do you have any thoughts you want to share with us on those?
I think that unless you have some sort of quotas, some organizations won't change. And that's the reality. As I said, what gets measured gets done. I was told that as a very young police officer. And therefore, unfortunately, that's the way it is. And that's the way it is in business performance, isn't it? Financial returns, return on investment, all the rest of it. That's no different. We look at our turnover of staff in terms of attrition rates. They're metrics. They're just different metrics. It's just about getting the right one and understanding why you've chosen quotas. And if you've chosen quotas, it's because you're failing somewhere else. So you've got to do something to make it up.
Mark, I interrupted your questions then.
No, it's all right. Actually, we have another question come in. Help me understand what diversity means. I struggle with categorizing individuals based on external characteristics due to the variation within groups.
Don't do it, because we're all different. You know, we have these categories because it makes it easier for people to put us in boxes. And if you think about intersectionality and Kimberly Crenshaw, you know, we intersect. And I spoke, I think it's probably 2 years ago now, at the Women in Nuclear Global Conference, and I actually didn't speak. I wrote a conference, a poem, and I went, well, which box do you put me in? Because I'm a Black female who's gay, I have some hidden disabilities. Which box are you going to stuff me in? Because I'm going over them. So, and the minute you start doing that, you start looking at people not as individuals, but as a category, and you dehumanize them. And then your biases kick in, unconscious or otherwise, and then you thwart whatever your intentions were. And the impact will be that you won't progress things. So I know it's difficult because we want data that captures people in terms of categories, but when you're dealing with people on a human level, treat them as human beings, see them as human beings. There's more to them than the category that they sit in for reporting and recording purposes.
We still have time for a couple more questions. Mark, if you have any additional questions.
Yeah, so I've read some pretty interesting studies that I don't think are well understood or well presented, where they actually took a problem, presented it to a non-diverse team, presented it to a diverse team. And so what happened? And very quickly, the non-diverse team quickly came up with a solution, and a diverse team took longer, but was more creative and more effective in the solution they came up with. And I don't really hear that, you know, it's like, okay, diversity, but why? And that's a very important answer. And I think that's part of the answer to the why. And I'm wondering how much you're able to share that or promote that within organizations.
And I do talk about that a lot, but it comes back to that business case thing that I have a bit of an aversion to, and an itch on justifying why you need to have diversity from a business point of view. But as you said, Mark, all the research shows that diverse themes are more practical, but also it's not just about that as well. I think there's an understanding of you can get diversity in the door, but unless you're inclusive, diversity will walk out the door. Diversity comes in, and then you've got these constraints of the fit-in culture. It's the way we do things around here. And then diversity, all that creativity gets stifled and suppressed. And maybe why you wanted them in the first place doesn't actually come to fruition. And then some would argue, oh, well, that doesn't work because the environment isn't conducive for them to be able to do more than survive. It doesn't enable them to thrive and contribute in a way that is beneficial for everyone. So my view is, and my experience is, before you start thinking about hiring diversely, how supportive is your organization? When I had my son in 1988, and UK policing had decided to issue officers with stab-resistant vests, and they were mandatory, I went back to work as a breastfeeding mother and found that the equipment didn't fit me because they'd forgotten that women have breasts. And so they bought all this equipment for men, but didn't fit us. And women got badly injured by trying to wear them, wasted a lot of money. That's what I mean by you look at diversity first, you get difference in the door, and then you suddenly go, oh, they're different. We haven't catered for them. Wow, now we've got a problem. Who would figure?
There's a comment made by one of our colleagues in the chat room. She says, this is an excellent and encouraging presentation. The risk of falling into the trap of thinking that something is being tackled by many actions, especially in the international arena, but it's not really happening. how to supervise or help monitoring that we are not happy with policies of diversity that finally are or are not having a practical and profound change. Just, I thought I would convey that. Also, it's interesting to hear somebody speak about diversity and inclusion in such a hands-on, concrete way, because I think sometimes we tend to think about it theoretically. And I think the nuclear business needs to get down and start thinking concretely about how they can change things. And I was giving a talk on gender and diversity earlier, and my comment was, it's not about counting people, but making people's voices count that matters. And I think you've really focused on that, getting out of this. Although metrics are great, one has to be careful not to fall into that that trap of just looking at numbers and not human beings.
Exactly.
So we have, if you'd like to add anything else, we've got another minute or so.
I'd just like to say for everyone to think about impact, the impact on individual lives by not doing what you're doing, the impact of not supporting people to do more than survive in your organization and your industry, and what the loss that is to everyone, including the global community and the world. You know, we don't live in an island. We all impact and influence each other. So it's massive. You know, the people say it's not about intent, it's about impact. No, it's not. It's about impact.
Great. Well, Marcia, thank you very, very much. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Mark, and he'll be introducing our next speaker. But don't go away, Marcia. We'll come back to you.
All right, yeah, thank you, Laura. So our next speaker is Lars Van Dassen, and Lars is the executive director of the World Institute for Nuclear Security, known as WINS, and has worked in the nuclear non-proliferation security field for more than 30 years. His academic background is in international and political science. From 1993 until 2001, he was a scholar at the Peace Research Institute, Frankfurt, and the Department for Peace and Conflict Research in Uppsala University. In 2001, he joined the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority and became responsible for the implementation of international projects, primarily in the field of nuclear security in Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Moldova, and the Baltic States. And his title of his talk is Moving Forward in a Nuclear Security Paradigm.
Thank you so much, Mark. I will say up front that I don't have slides. I hope that you see me. It's a bit awkward, the light here, that has to do with the fact that it is a very murky day in Sweden. And it's with very heavy rainfalls outside. Instead of slides, I will then offer my facial expressions and occasional gestures to support my claims. If I'd been asked to serve on the opening panel last year on the same topic, I think that my focus would very much have been on the amended Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials and the review conference for this that would ensue in March this year. I would also address the issue of gender parity and other issues related to diversity and inclusion that, if we take them seriously, greatly contribute to the efficiency and effectiveness of nuclear security. I would surely have mentioned the challenges arising from climate change. The angle that is most commonly addressed is the context in which nuclear power technologies are developed and what this means for nuclear security. I think that this is an important issue, but I would also have addressed the issue of how climate change leads to new patterns of conflict in states and between states, and how this creates a set of risks of growing terrorism, including nuclear terrorism. As said, this would have been my approach if I had spoken last year. This year, I think things have changed a lot. Over the past 5 months since the onset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, nuclear security has changed more than in the previous 5 decades. The mentioned issues remain very, very important, but they have competition from the Russian warfare against Ukraine, and not least how this is played out in the nuclear sphere. Or maybe it's fair to say that the war in Ukraine has greatly influenced what it is we can and should make of the would-be issues from last year. But that is a separate story that we'll have to return to when we can see the contours more clearly. I associate myself with what was said by Marcia, as gender equality and inclusiveness are ultimately a question of justice. This is also relevant for understanding the ups and downs and rights and wrongs in the perspectives of the Russian war against Ukraine. I understand that this war is the first war over territorial conquest since the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990. And while there have been earlier occasions of military attacks against nuclear installations and facilities, we now have a whole panoply of events unfolding. Russia has occupied the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Russia has occupied the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the exclusion zone around it, but been forced out again. There have been missile strikes and bombing raids against the Kharkiv Institute of Physics and Technology. Several radon facilities for the storage of radioactive waste have been attacked. And the other nuclear power plants in Ukraine and on the have been overflown by missiles, creating an incredible hazard. These issues are ongoing and unfolding as we speak, and the ramifications for nuclear security and safety are enormous. And we may not even have seen the end of the threats yet. I will return to that later. But first, I will mention 2 global ramifications. First of all, we run the risk of another Fukushima, in the sense that the Fukushima accident in 2011 led to a slowing down of the building of new nuclear power plants and also led to the rapid closure of existing ones, at a moment in time when fossil-free sources of energy were becoming really important. There is, of course, a risk that many current plans for nuclear power will become the subject of question marks over how well the nuclear security and safety can be ensured in the light of how things have unfolded as a consequence of the Russian occupation of Ukraine, and particularly the occupation of the Zaporozhye NPP. But there are other risks as well. I think that the much lauded spirit of Vienna, or the consensus-seeking and pragmatic workings of the IAEA, and particularly the Board of Governors, has entered a deep crisis. When a recognized nuclear weapons state and permanent member of the UN Security Council, and one of the leading members of the IAEA's Board of Governors is behind the aggression unfolding in Ukraine, and displaying such level of insensitivity to all the mechanisms in nuclear safety, safeguards, security, and radiation protection, then we have a crisis. We have a crisis as concerns how far the IAEA and the UN can come in addressing the pertinent issues and make the necessary decisions. And it's already hard to see how this situation can be remedied in the near future. Above, I mentioned 2 large consequences for the world arising from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think that we need to mainly consider the suffering that is happening in Ukraine and at the facilities under occupation and threat. It is now known that there were people working with crucial nuclear security, safety, and radiation protection functions at Chernobyl that were forced to be on duty for weeks and who were worked to death. There were other persons who disappeared and were abducted, and that have still not returned to their homes. At the Zaporozhye NPP, the Ukrainian staff is similarly working under extreme conditions of duress and pressure, and several casualties have been the consequences. But we do not know what will be next. There are still escalations available short of a Russian use of nuclear weapons. Various observers point to the risk of Russia bombing Ukrainian nuclear power plants in Western Ukraine, as the fallout would in that case affect Ukraine and neighboring countries that do support Ukraine. Even if there are still additional threats available in this area, then there are two very important recent issues that have had very little attention. One concerns the relationship between the attacker and defender of a nuclear facility. One of the lessons from the Russian attacks on Chernobyl and Zaporozhye NPP is that defender is aware of the menace arising from damage to the facility and thus fights with restraint. I think that this is a realization that is important for nuclear security everywhere and not only for war situations. Nuclear security is to a very large extent the question of preparedness and deterrence, but once there is a sharp conflict and situation, then the stakes are suddenly somewhat different, and we need to consider this fact a lot more than we have done so far. Secondly, I'll say that Russia has put a bomb on the peaceful nuclear cooperation. I know from people at the Chernobyl site that the occupiers from Rosatom facilities that Russia sent to Chernobyl were the same institutions and persons who had been the partners under Ukrainian-Russian partnership schemes before the war. Just taste this. The partners with whom you cooperate one day in the pursuit of solving technical and practical problems, they return the next day as occupiers. This aspect is simply appalling and needs to be addressed a lot more. What I've said so far is extremely sobering. So when the title for my speech refers to moving forward and new nuclear security paradigm, then I do not have a clear-cut answer to what a new paradigm will look like and where it will move. But I can offer some building blocks, and by mentioning those, I will also say that getting and going somewhere will demand a huge effort by many good forces. Here are my 6 big issues that we need to accomplish. First, we need to keep a close view of the international forum that become the victim of the current turbulence. The GICNT Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism has suspended its operations in the area of combating smuggling and illicit handling of nuclear and radioactive materials. Other international fora may also be affected and be unable to act as intended. In that case, we need to look at where and how we can work and work can be placed in other institutions or where new institutions may have to be formed. Secondly, we need a new series of nuclear security summits. The big achievement of the 4 nuclear security summits held between 2010 and 2016 was a codex or norm among states that states stand together in the fight against nuclear terrorism, and states do not do nuclear security threats and terror attacks against each other. This norm can no longer be taken for granted and needs to be reinstalled with as many states and governments as possible. Thirdly, we need to address things by their right names and understand that international law and civility is an underpinning for everything, also for nuclear security. In short, we need to think nuclear security, nuclear safety, radiation protection, safeguards, and peaceful nuclear cooperation are important. And if they are so, then it's also obvious that Russia is behind the trespasses and violence. A support for the sanctity of international law is a support for Ukraine. It is as simple as that. Fourth, we need to spur the professionalization of the nuclear security trade. Nuclear security everywhere relies on the knowledge and dedication of the individuals who do guards rounds, watch CCTV cameras, install them, and upgrade sensor systems, carry out cyber security measures, etc., etc. They are the front line when things are peaceful, and they're the front line should a threat materialize. More people who know more and are more accomplished professionals will generate ideas and make it possible for us to make progress. In this regard, WINS has some 5,500 members in 145 countries, and we will, in the course of fall, start activities with our members where we address the new security challenges in order to find ways forward. Fifth, we need to address how inclusive we want to be vis-à-vis Russia. Is it acceptable to participate in meetings where Russian state representatives are present and we give away issues related to nuclear security? These pieces of information could be used against us or against Ukraine and for the continued occupation or attacks on nuclear facilities. These are incredibly unpleasant issues to consider for organizations, fora, and NGOs that wish to be inclusive, but we had to consider these issues and not become victims of our own openness, simply because that openness can harm us and third parties. We do not want to experience what the Chernobyl staff experienced, that their openness and cooperation was later used against them. Six, it is probably also relevant to look at how the security of critical infrastructure has been dealt with in other contexts. Maybe there are important lessons from the protection of oil refineries and chemical combines that can be helpful. In short, we need to expand our views. The 6 issues mentioned above are only a start. The responses to them bring together prudence, knowledge, and a commitment to international cooperation based on international law. That is a good place to start. In fact, it is the only place we can start. Beyond that, much remains unclear, but understanding and challenges in nuclear security, understanding the challenges in nuclear security starts now. I bid you welcome to a journey into a rocky landscape, but where there will eventually be a prosperous solution. The INMM is probably the best situated forum for leading this global debate, and WINS is ready to partner with you. Thank you so much, Chairman.
Thank you, Lars. Boy, another such a difficult situation, and one that the timeline is totally unknown. I guess one thing I'm wondering is when you talk about looking at maybe some future agreements to address this, what do you think would come to mind? Is it almost like having a new treaty with a third party that would protect some critical facilities like this, or at least neutrally take it over to keep it out of a war zone? Or I know that's not an easy question, but
now, see, in general, the conclusion of, or what is embedded in that question is that it's the sanctity of international law, that we regard that as very important and a way forward. But that, of course, also then demands that there is a respect for international law. And virtually everything that has happened during this invasion and in the nuclear area is a violation of that. There's already a lot of principles and international norms for various issues that have been violated. Strengthening all this will of course be important. But then again, in the specific context, I'm not sure that it's going to be of much help. Bringing the Russian government to court over this will be very difficult and probably only possible after, as part of some big bargain or downfall of the government, that it's the previous government representatives that can be sent to court. Simply because Russia is one of the cornerstones of the international nuclear order, both for nuclear weapons, for disarmament, for non-proliferation, etc., etc. And in that entire order, Russia has nuclear weapons, and ultimately that is also something that can. It was intended somehow in the makeup of the system that it would bestow certain countries with additional responsibilities, but once that responsibility is then put aside, then we have a problem that I'm not sure that we really have been able to foresee.
Thank you. So Laura, do we have any questions?
We do. We have a comment and a question. Given that Russia's violation of nuclear safety norms may establish a new precedent of conduct in wartime, do you think that more consideration of the potential vulnerabilities of nuclear plants in military conflicts needs to occur in the design and siting process? A practical, down-to-earth question about, are there things that can be done to protect such facilities going forward? Lars, love to hear your answer.
Yeah, I think that that is going to be the case more or less automatically. That these are things that are going to be considered far beyond what has so far been the case. But again, it brings with it its own set of difficulties. If you think of, when the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant was established, that was during the Soviet era. That was when that facility in Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and so was Russia. And then, more than 30 years later, you have a complete new situation, and that can be the case also in other parts of the world. That what at one moment in time seems to be a stable region suddenly turns out to be less stable, and then it's not that nuclear facilities are outside of the risky zones, but are actually inside them, or even in the middle of them. I think it's going to be the case. It was probably already the case before the war, that there were considerations of various systems that could either jam electronically or shoot down drones that would come close to nuclear facilities. Other systems will probably also be considered that relate to much more heavy weapon systems, such as aircraft and incoming missiles. But it is, this is the entire issue that I think everyone would have wished would not be a consideration, namely that some of the basic foundation that was there for a long time, written or unwritten, namely that we don't do such threat to each other that could also harm ourselves, which would be attacking a nuclear facility, and if there is a release, that release could go in all directions, even in the direction of the country that created the attack. But that is a norm that has maybe been less successful or more naive than we had hoped for.
Another question I had is, you alluded to this. It's the issue of how inclusive the nuclear security world is in terms of doing hands across the ocean kind of thing, engaging Russian scientists to try to, I don't know, perhaps agree on a statement of policy. It's very, very difficult, I'm sure, for the Russian scientists that are in Russia right now. But is there some initiative on the part of the people involved in the nuclear security profession to try to establish some sort of code of conduct? It's maybe not hard law, but might at least show the consensus among the nuclear security professionals in the world.
I wish that was the case, and I'm aware of maybe one US-based forum that is trying to keep an open door and dialogue with counterparts in Russia, but that's about it. And I think it also has a lot to do with question marks that we have to put now. I think earlier on we could say, okay, if we deal in a track 1 dialogue with Russia, that would be fine. Track 2 would be fine. Track 3, that would be fine, but less interesting. I think now we are if we end up in a track 2 dialogue, then it will be known that anyone from Russia is a person who has been granted access to participating under certain conditions. So it's not that we'll be speaking with individuals who would be open and free to engage in a manner that would be helpful. Then what is left is then track 3, but I'm not sure that there is anyone who wants to be available for that, because that's also becoming more and more risky to engage in that level in Russia. And track 1, I think, is very much out of the country, out of the context. It used to be that there were many of these dialogues where there would then be retired Russian generals, etc., etc. I don't think anyone would now want to engage in anything where there are retired Russian generals. On the whole, I think that there are many who have had contacts with Russia, myself included, who are dismayed by what they have discovered of former Russian colleagues serving purposes for the regime, participating in some of these horrendous television shows where just all kinds of cataclysmic things are being said and uttered, and where it used to be persons that we thought we had a good dialogue with them, and suddenly they appear on the hawkish side in Russia. So there's all kinds of ample reason to be really careful of what it is that we engage in.
We have a couple more questions that have come up. One is related to the first question. What can states do to help nuclear operators at existing facilities prepare for and be more resilient to extended crises like a war? And secondarily, what should the IAEA's role be when war breaks out in a country with a significant nuclear infrastructure, as in the case of Ukraine? So maybe if you could talk first about what states might be able to do to help nuclear operators, and then secondarily, a role for the IAEA.
Well, I think that this is, often if one thing doesn't work, then there is always a recourse to something that used to work, or is maybe the starting point. And this is probably where we come back to a relationship between industry and states, and taking a responsibility from that point of view. And that is actually also in accordance with all the international conventions and guidelines for the area, that ultimately this is a responsibility for the state. But we have, over the past 15, 20 years, we have come into a very practical mode of relying on international cooperation as a way of driving this issue forward. Now is the time to somehow return to some of the basics. And then in bilateral cooperation between states who trust each other, trilateral, etc., multilateral. But I think we are, with that, also moving away from being able to put the full sanctity of this issue into what is fully international fora, simply because there are partners there that we don't trust. So that's as simple as it. The issue of a role for the IA is difficult. I think that the current situation underlines that the IA has a number of granted competences, particularly with respect to safeguards, but where it is a lot harder when it comes to safety and security. It's not that the IA has a mandate as such to go into any country and go in and replace an occupying power, occupied power, etc., etc. The role of the IA is, of course, in accordance with its statute, and it doesn't foresee situations like this one. So for anything new and different, it would have to be then a convention negotiated to the effect of giving the IA such powers. But I cannot I can simply not imagine that being possible to negotiate such a convention under the certain circumstances. There would be at least one country and probably two and a whole lot more that would be against any such steps and their fulfillment.
Mark, back to you.
Yeah, so I'm thinking now, our next speaker is actually going to talk about some of the future of nuclear power. And I'm thinking now with the very first question about design and siting, some of these new advanced reactors have very many passive systems to try to avoid some previous accidents we've seen. And maybe that's something that's a little bit of a connection here, not a solution at all. But I wonder how you view that in terms of what potentially new designs might be able to do to at least make facilities less vulnerable to a war type environment.
I think viewed under the right light and in the right discussion, it could actually be small modular reactors that are the salvation. Simply because they're smaller and would be very, very difficult to target compared to current nuclear power plants. But still, of course, there are different security parameters that would need to be observed. But SMRs, they have their own set of security requirements that I actually think are both positive and negative compared to conventional nuclear power plants. But then, of course, it depends on the specific context where they are placed, whether it, at the end of the day, the sum is more positive or negative in comparison with the conventional nuclear power plants. But it is definitely an issue that needs to be discussed, and I'm sure it will in the coming years.
All right. Thank you. We're just about out of time. Laura, is there any other question, or we can actually...
Nope, I think we can just move right along. As a matter of fact, you point out that was an excellent segue into our next speaker. I have the pleasure to introduce Jeff Navin. Jeff is the Director of External Affairs for Terrapower. For those of you who haven't heard about that, it's an organization that was founded by Bill Gates and other philanthropists, visionaries, and its mission includes developing advanced nuclear energy to meet growing electricity needs, to mitigate climate change, and to lift a heavy lift, to lift billions out of poverty. He is also the co-founder of something called Boundary Stone Partners, a leading climate change government affairs firm that works at the intersection of technology, finance, and policy. He has over 20 years of experience in the executive and legislative branches of the US government, having served in the Department of Energy, Department of Labor, and on the Hill in positions both in congressional positions and on the Senate, with the Chief of Staff to Research Director, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle. He also was in private practice as a lawyer, which is dear to my heart. He's recognized expert on government, communications, and energy, and is very frequently quoted by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Bloomberg, Politico, Axios, and Time Magazine. Jeff, it would be great to hear your views on the future, and perhaps you can address some of those issues that were even raised during Lars's presentation and Marcia's. So you have the floor, Jeff. Your turn to speak.
Great, thank you. And thanks for allowing me to be with you today as well. What a great panel, and hopefully I can have the third presenter be as good as the first two. So as Laura mentioned, my name's Jeff Navin. I'm the Director of External Affairs for Terrapower. I spent about 20 years in government. My last job in government was the Acting Chief of Staff and the Deputy Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Energy under Secretary Steve Chu and Ernie Moniz. I left government and founded a consulting firm with a partner that was focused on clean energy and focused on fighting climate change and getting support for a variety of clean energy technologies. And one of the things that was interesting to me was, at the Department of Energy, especially under Secretaries Chu and Moniz, there really wasn't a question about the role that nuclear power needed to play in combating climate change. And there was a consensus view within the leadership of those folks that were working on climate in the Obama administration that we weren't going to solve climate change